Today we're going to build this mid-century modern inspired desk on 4 eyes. So this was another one of those projects where a lot was happening simultaneously. So rather than trying to show everything chronologically, I'm going to go through it in parts, which will hopefully make it a little bit easier to follow along. And I think that the best place to start is with the base. In these shots so far, all that I've been doing is going through the wood that I'm going to use for the base, to figure out where all the pieces would come from. And then I'm just cutting them into some bite-sized pieces that I could refine. But before I start doing that, let's quickly go through the design. So the piece initially came together like this, just to get all the proportions and ideas down. And I think that this looks cool, but it was just a little generic for me. I felt like it was missing some oomph. The main part that I really wasn't happy with was the way that it looked from the profile view. Everything just kind of looked flat and chunky. I think that the line work in the drawing maybe obscures that a bit, but I was just afraid that when it was made out of wood in the real world, it would lack depth. So I decided to start adding some depth by recessing this bottom leg connector piece in a bit. From there, that led to recessing a couple portions in the top side piece to visually continue the lines created by the legs. And then that carried on to a few more details where the main theme was basically staggering depths. And you'll see all that as we build. Okay, so at this point I had all of my hardwood pieces for the structure roughed out. And I know that we just saw an animation, but let me quickly cut to one more just to show how the base is going to come together, because I think that's going to make it a lot easier to explain everything. And I promise I'll keep this one short. So we're going to make 4 legs, and those are going to get half laps. The top piece in the leg assembly is going to be milled a little bit thinner so that it's flush only on the inside. To that we'll add a back panel and a few stretchers. On top of that we'll have the tabletop, of course. Then these top side pieces, a few vertical partitions, and the smaller top piece that the monitor can sit on. Okay, now for reals, let's build this thing. So I started by milling all of my pieces down to their finished thicknesses, which is all pretty straightforward. And these pieces were flat enough that I could skip joining them beforehand. Here in this shot, you can see that everything is 1 3/4 inch thick, except for this last piece, which is about 1.5 inches thick. That's the recessed piece that we'll connect the 2 legs together with to make the sub-assemblies. Alright, the first pieces that we're going to cut to shape are the front legs. So here I'm going to start by making a rip cut so that I'm only using the amount that I need. And that's because the offcut's pretty big and I can definitely use it for something later. And I get yelled at a lot for doing this whole one glove thing whenever I'm ripping wood with a rough edge, and I'm not telling anybody else to do it. I'll actually go a step further and say do not do this, but I prefer it. So whatever, don't judge. Also, don't judge this moonwalk attempt. Sneakers on a concrete floor are less than ideal. Next, I got out my miter gauge and cut a 30-degree angle onto each end of this board. And that's because this is going to be the angle that the front leg leans back at. Also, if you're wondering why the board looks chunky right now, it's because we're going to get both legs from this piece. The next step was to mark out the tapers that I wanted to cut along the inside edges of the leg. Now, normally this is something that I would use my tapering jig to cut out, but it turns out that the legs were just a tiny bit too long for the jig. So instead I'm going to use a quick sled jig to get the job done. So here I'm locking down my fence, making a cut, and then leaving it there until I'm done using the sled. Once I had done that, I clamped my workpiece to the sled so that the cut line was right on the edge. Then I screwed down some scrap blocks to hold the piece still while I was cutting it on the table saw. And my first attempt at this didn't really go great. There was a little bit of wiggle apparently, which is obvious in this shot when I'm making my second cut and nothing's being removed. So I added a back piece to my sled, as well as this sort of bridge clamp piece to hold it secure, readjusted, and cut each piece once more. So now the piece is a tiny bit smaller at the top than I had initially planned, but it's not enough to really matter. After that, I could use the same process to create my front legs. The main difference here though was that because they don't lean in at an angle, I could skip that first step of making the angled cuts on the end of my board. Basically, you just want to have a nice 90-degree piece to start with. Now let's make the thinner piece that's going to connect the legs to make the sub-assemblies. So we started off by ripping a couple pieces to width. And the guy that you see here, who isn't me, is Michael Alm. He came by the shop for a few days to help me put this desk together and to build a pair of cabinets which will live under and or beside the desk. And I gotta say that he absolutely knocked it out of the park with these things. And he'll actually have a full build of those on his channel, Almfab, which is gonna be live right now, so I'm gonna make sure to include a link to that video in the description. Definitely check his stuff out whenever you have a chance. I always cringe at the thought of calling myself an artist, but Michael, dude's an artist. Okay, so in this shot I'm using the connector piece to mark out where we'll need to start cutting some half laps on the front and back legs. Once that was done, I set my blade height to match the thickness of the top connector piece. Then I could use my miter gauge to make a cut right on the lines that I had marked on the legs. By the way, my son is standing next to me while I record this, and he wants to say hello.
Hello, nice to see you again.
Next, I set my blade height to match the width, or height, that I'd ripped my connector pieces to. And in theory, this should also be the same height as the line that we just cut into our leg pieces in the last step. Then I grabbed the little vertical panel carrying jig thing that I made from my table saw, set the fence so that the outside of the blade matched the thickness of the connector piece, and then I could run the legs vertically on the table saw to clear out the rest of the material. Alright, next I'm going to mark out the shape that I want to cut my connector pieces to, which I'll do using my sled and miter gauge before I glue up. And that's going to be the last thing that we need to take care of for the leg sub-assemblies. Speaking of care of, thank you Care of for sponsoring this video. So if you haven't heard of them, Care of delivers personalized daily vitamin and supplement packs to help maintain better personal health. The vitamins and supplements are sourced with top quality ingredients, and packs are customized with honest, transparent information. I first started using Care of about a year and a half ago, and during that time my life has changed quite a bit. I went from working a 9-to-5 job in addition to making videos full-time, to now just making videos full-time. What I'm getting at is, since Care of makes recommendations based on your individual circumstances, it seemed like a good idea to retake the quiz, answer a few questions about my new situation and goals, and get a new list of recommended supplements that would be best for me. And since the whole thing only takes about 5 minutes and is actually kind of fun, I was happy to do it. So last time my main concern was getting better sleep. Thankfully, that area of my life has improved quite a bit after leaving my 9-to-5, and my main goal now has more to do with fitness and overall energy. And to that end, I was recommended a number of supplements like rhodiola and ashwagandha. Sorry for the name butchering. Anyhow, I switched over from my old supplements to these new ones, and so far, things are going really well. This month I built 3 large projects, have been going to the gym pretty regularly, and even managed to be productive enough to take 2 days off of work for a little vacation. Now, all that said, the greatest vitamins or supplements in the world would be rendered totally useless if you didn't actually take them. And that's why my favorite thing about Care of is how convenient they make it for you to remember. Everything comes in daily use packs, and I even built this little dispenser cover for mine. So I just leave it on my bathroom counter, and that way I remember to take them right before I brush my teeth every morning. Alright, so right now you can get 25% off of your first month of Care of vitamins by going to takecareof.com and using the code 4eyes at checkout. Or just click the link in the description box below. So check them out. Okay, Thanks, Karev. While the leg sub-assemblies dried, the next step was to create all of the pieces that are going to tie them together to make it a base. So here I'm ripping a nice chunk off of a sheet of plywood, and I was worried that it might tip over the edge, so that's why I got the Alm caboose. Alright, now this base spans about 5 feet, and I don't have any clamps that are that long, so I decided to use some strap clamps here. And this worked okay, except that it wanted to force the front of the desk to toe in a little bit. Luckily, the other stretchers were already cut to length, so I could just set one of those on the other end as things dried up. While that was going on, I used my pocket hole jig to drill a pair of holes into each end of each stretcher piece. And these are going to face towards each other, both facing towards the center of the underside of the desk, so you're never going to see them unless you're under my desk. And I don't run that kind of business, so. Okay, part 2 of this build is also up right now, and in that video we're going to make the entire top structure and a lot of the details that I think really set this desk apart. So I'll see you over there in 5 seconds.